Have you ever wondered what it's really like to be among the wealthiest people in the land down under? While you might think Australian billionaires spend their days lounging on Sydney harbour yachts or hosting lavish parties in Toorak mansions, the reality is far more surprising. Did you know that one of Australia's richest mining magnates still carries a tattered wallet from the 1980s? Or that a tech billionaire in Melbourne chooses to drive a 15-year-old Toyota rather than a Ferrari? Perhaps most shocking of all, some of Australia's wealthiest families deliberately send their children to public schools to avoid the silver spoon syndrome. These aren't just random exceptions. They reflect something deeply unique about Australia's super rich. What you're about to discover might completely change how you view wealth in this sunburnt country. You see, while American billionaires often embrace celebrity status and European old money whispers of aristocracy, Australia's wealthy elite operate by a different cultural code entirely, one shaped by the nation's complex relationship with wealth, tall poppy syndrome, and a distinctly Australian approach to success. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a world few ever see, where billion-dollar deals are sometimes sealed not in boardrooms, but at local surf clubs at dawn, where some of the country's most powerful families deliberately live in middle class suburbs, and where showing off your wealth might be the quickest way to lose respect among the truly wealthy. Unlike Europe's centuries of aristocratic wealth, or America's Gilded Age tycoons, Australia's first major fortunes emerged from the gold rushes of the 1850s, creating a wealth culture founded not on inheritance or title, but on the luck of striking it rich in the harsh outback. Take Sydney Kidman, once Australia's largest landowner with holdings larger than some European countries. Despite his immense wealth, he was known to sleep under the stars alongside his workers and wear the same weathered clothes for days. When asked why he didn't live more luxuriously, he reportedly said, "What good is a fancy bed to a man who knows the value of the land beneath it?" This historical foundation created something unique, a wealthy class that, unlike almost anywhere else in the world, often felt compelled to downplay rather than showcase their fortune. And this cultural DNA still flows through the veins of Australia's modern billionaires in ways that might astonish you. Australia's wealthy broadly fall into three distinct categories, each with their own unspoken rules and customs that might seem baffling to outsiders. First, there are the resource titans, those who built fortunes in mining, agriculture, and natural resources. You might expect these billionaires to live like oil sheikhs, but here's what will surprise you. Many maintain almost middle-class lifestyles in public. Take the case of John, a mining magnate worth over $2 billion, who still eats lunch at the same local cafe 3 times a week, ordering the $15 special, and chatting with regulars who have no idea of his net worth. His office isn't in a gleaming skyscraper, but in a converted warehouse in Perth. "The rocks don't care how fancy your office is," he often says. Then there are the quiet innovators, tech founders and business disruptors who've built fortunes in relative obscurity. Unlike their Silicon Valley counterparts who embrace celebrity status, Australia's tech billionaires often actively avoid public recognition. Consider the story of Sarah, who sold her software company for over $700 million in 2018. Even after the sale, she continued living in the same modest home in Melbourne's inner suburbs and driving her 2010 Subaru. Her neighbours were shocked to discover her wealth only when the Australian Financial Review accidentally published details of the deal. The moment Australians know you're wealthy, they start treating you differently, she explained to a close symbiote. "Friend, I value being treated normally more than I value showing off what I have." Perhaps most intriguing are the dynastic stewards, 3rd or 4th generation wealthy families who've maintained and grown their fortunes over decades. One prominent family in Sydney, worth well over $3 billion, has a tradition they call the reversal, where each family member must work in service jobs for at least 2 years before accessing any family wealth. One heir worked as a garbage collector, another as a nursing home assistant. "It builds character and perspective," explains a family elder. "Anyone who complains about it doesn't understand what our wealth is really for." Step into the private world of Australia's super rich, and you'll discover daily routines and habits that defy expectations in ways that reflect distinctly Australian values. The morning ritual of many Australian billionaires begins not with breakfast, in bed served by staff, but with something that might shock you: physical activity in public spaces. In Sydney's eastern suburbs, several billionaires participate in the Bold and Beautiful Swim Squad at Manly Beach every morning, donning the same pink caps as everyone else in the group, indistinguishable from retirees and office workers. One property tycoon worth over $1.2 billion has missed only 5 days in 7 years. In the ocean, everyone is equal, he explains. It grounds me in reality before the insanity of running multiple companies. While wealthy Americans might collect art and Europeans might acquire vineyards, Australia's ultra-rich often invest passionately in land conservation. One media heiress has quietly spent over $40 million purchasing degraded farmland. Not for development, but for native regeneration projects most Australians will never know exist. What about their homes? Here's where things get truly counterintuitive. While some do own spectacular waterfront properties, many of Australia's wealthiest families deliberately choose to live in good, but not ostentatious neighbourhoods. Drive through parts of Melbourne's Camberwell or Sydney's Neutral Bay, and you might pass homes worth a relatively modest $3 to $4 million that house individuals worth hundreds of millions. Perhaps most surprising are their shopping and consumption habits. Australia's truly wealthy rarely shop at the luxury boutiques on Collins Street or in Westfield, Sydney. Instead, they often have personal relationships with artisans and providers. The fourth-generation bootmaker who creates custom leather goods. The family-owned furniture maker who crafts pieces meant to last generations. One banking family has a tradition of removing all designer labels from their clothing. Quality shouldn't need announcing, the family matriarch explains. If someone can't recognize quality without a logo, their opinion on it doesn't matter much. Perhaps the most jaw-dropping tradition exists among certain wealthy families in Queensland and Western Australia. The practice of wealth blindfolding. Children in these families grow up in comfortable but deliberately modest homes, attend good but not elite schools, and often have no idea of their family's true wealth until they're well into their 20s. Imagine the shock of James, who grew up believing his family ran a moderately successful construction business. On his 25th birthday, after completing university and working for 3 years at an entry-level position, his parents took him to a nondescript office building in Brisbane. There, they revealed the family's actual holdings, a multinational corporation valued at over $2 billion. The sound of paper sliding across a conference table, the feeling of stunned silence, the taste of celebratory champagne that suddenly felt inadequate. These sensory moments marked his unusual initiation into wealth. Then there's the peculiar phenomenon of the anti-status symbol, items deliberately chosen to broadcast modesty rather than wealth. In certain circles of Melbourne's wealthiest families, vintage Volvo station wagons became an unexpected status symbol. The more weathered, the better. Meanwhile, arriving at certain exclusive events in a Ferrari or Lamborghini would mark you as new money, or even vulgar. One mining billionaire famously drives a 15-year-old Land Cruiser covered in red Outback dust. When asked why he doesn't upgrade, he replied, "This one knows all the roads I need to travel." Perhaps most contradictory is how Australia's super-rich approach vacation properties. While many own multiple homes, there's a strange phenomenon where many deliberately maintain one property that's almost deliberately uncomfortable. Consider the beach shack owned by one of Australia's wealthiest families on a remote coastal stretch. Worth billions, they could afford any level of luxury. Yet this property has no air conditioning, spotty cellular service, and furnishings that haven't been updated since the 1970s. Family members speak of staying there as a badge of honor. "Anyone who complains isn't invited back," explains a family member. "It's our way of making sure wealth hasn't softened us too much." Where do Australia's super-rich gather when they want to be among their own kind? Forget the obvious assumptions about yacht clubs and country estates. The most exclusive gathering spots for Australia's wealthy elite are often invisible to outsiders. One of Sydney's most exclusive social gatherings takes place not at an opulent mansion, but at a nondescript boat shed in Balmoral every Saturday morning. No formal invitations exist. You either know about it or you don't. Here, between 7 and 9 a.m., billionaires and centimillionaires gather for simple coffee and conversation after their morning swims. Business deals worth hundreds of millions have been conceptualized here. Marriages between prominent families arranged, and political campaigns quietly financed. All while participants sit on decades-old wooden benches in swim gear or casual clothes. In Melbourne, one of the most exclusive clubs has no sign, no website, and no listed phone number. Housed above a seemingly ordinary office building on Collins Street, access is granted solely through existing member nomination. Inside, the decor is deliberately understated. No gold fixtures or marble statues, just comfortable, well-worn leather chairs, and walls lined with books actually meant to be read. But what truly distinguishes Australia's wealthy social circles is the concept of concentric exclusivity. Unlike the straightforward velvet rope approach in places like Monaco or Manhattan, Australia's wealthy operate in layers of access that go beyond simple financial qualification. Take Point Piper in Sydney or Toorak in Melbourne. Yes, these suburbs house some of Australia's wealthiest residents. But simply buying a home there doesn't grant access to the inner social circles. New money residents often find themselves invited to the large charity galas, but not to the small dinner parties where the real connections happen. One of the most interesting social phenomena among Australia's wealthy is the practice of strategic invisibility at public events. At major functions like the Melbourne Cup or prominent charity galas, those with the most significant wealth often deliberately choose to be the least noticeable people in the room, while the socially ambitious arrive in flashy outfits and seek photo opportunities. The truly established wealthy often arrive with minimal fanfare, dress relatively conservatively, and position themselves away from photographers. Unlike the philanthropic approaches in America, where naming rights and public recognition often accompany major donations, Australia's wealthiest frequently channel their giving through structures designed to minimize public attention. The nameless foundation phenomenon, where significant charitable entities operate with deliberately generic titles and minimal public footprint, is surprisingly common. One of the country's largest educational foundations, distributing over $40 million annually to disadvantaged students, operates so discreetly that even many beneficiaries don't know the source of their support. Founded by a technology entrepreneur worth billions, the foundation's board meetings take place in suburban coffee shops rather than corporate boardrooms to maintain its low profile. The moment philanthropy becomes about the giver rather than the impact, something essential is lost, explains the foundation's founder. The gratitude of students who've changed their lives through education is worth far more than seeing my name on a building. This connects to a distinctly Australian cultural trait: the celebration of substance over show, impact over recognition. It also reflects a pragmatic assessment of the Australian public's complicated relationship with extreme wealth. Consider the contrasting public responses to two billionaires who faced business setbacks. One, known for flashy displays of wealth and self-promotion, received widespread public criticism during financial difficulties. Another, known for modest personal habits despite enormous wealth, received remarkable public support during similar challenges. The difference wasn't their actions, but how they had positioned themselves within Australia's cultural framework of acceptable wealth behaviour. In Australia, it's not wealth itself that creates resentment, explains one family office advisor. It's the perception that someone thinks their wealth makes them better than others. As we peer into the future of Australia's wealthy elite, several profound challenges are reshaping this discrete world in ways that may fundamentally alter its character. The first existential question facing Australia's traditional wealth culture is whether its distinctive understatement can survive in an increasingly globalized, social media-dominated world. As international wealth flows into Australia and younger generations grow up in a digital environment that celebrates visibility, the cultural pressure to maintain modest appearances faces unprecedented strain. My parents built a billion-dollar company while living in a home that looks like it belongs to a successful dentist, explains one next-generation heir. I respect that, but I also think their extreme privacy prevented them from using their platform for positive influence. There's a balance to be found. Perhaps most profound is the challenge of climate transition in a country where significant wealth has traditionally come from resources and energy. While some resource billionaires remain resistant to change, a surprising number are quietly redeploying capital toward renewable energy and sustainable technologies. The smart money sees where things are heading, explains one investor who made billions in traditional energy, but has now created one of Australia's largest renewable investment funds. Australia has everything needed to lead in the new economy: sun, wind, critical minerals, stable governance. The question is whether our wealth class will lead this transition or resist it. As we conclude our exploration of Australia's super rich, One question emerges that transcends wealth itself. Is Australia's distinctive wealth culture, with its emphasis on understatement, community connection, and practical competence, merely a historical artifact that will fade as global wealth? Cultures homogenize. Or does it represent something worth preserving, a healthier relationship between prosperity and society? What do you think? Is there something valuable in how many of Australia's wealthiest have approached their position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know which aspect of Australia's wealthy elite surprised you most. And if you enjoyed this exploration of Australia's discreet wealth culture, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating glimpses into the hidden worlds that shape our society.